We want to talk a little bit more about what's underway right now in Sharm el-Sheikh and what we've heard so far from the U.S. president. So to discuss all of that, joining me now is Nader Hashemi. He is a professor of Middle East politics at Georgetown University. He joins us now from Washington. Thank you for making time for us.
Thank you for the invitation.
You know, I was just discussing with our Washington correspondent the significance of all of these players gathering together in Sharm el-Sheikh and what that may mean for the future of peace in Gaza. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news or to play the role of a skunk at a garden party, but unfortunately, a lot of this discussion about the meeting in Sharm el-Sheikh being historically unprecedented and what we're seeing today being a possibility for broader regional peace is, I think, a gross distortion of both the historical record on this conflict and what Trump's peace plan actually is all about. In terms of the historical unprecedented nature of what we're seeing today, there have been many American peace plans that we have witnessed before, where world leaders have gathered together. Just to cite one example, it was in 1993 where Bill Clinton had this famous ceremony on the White House lawn where he brought together then Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat shaking hands, and they won the Nobel Peace Prize, and all these world leaders were gathered together. We can go back to Jimmy Carter. We can go back to George W. Bush, who had a major, meeting of world leaders in Madrid. All of those peace plans, I would argue, paved the way for October the 7th and brought us to this crisis moment today, largely because, number one, they've avoided steadfastly an international law framework for solving this conflict. And critically, they've ignored the roots of this crisis, the question of occupation and the denial of the rights of the Palestinians to statehood. Just to cite one example that sort of highlights the point I'm trying to make, is that this peace plan that Donald Trump is touting as being the best peace plan in thousands of years was a peace plan that was put together where one of the two parties to the conflict, the Palestinians, had no voice in contributing to the peace plan. Not even the pro-Western Palestinian faction in Ramallah was consulted over the details of the peace plan. It was largely an Israeli peace plan that was drawn up with the Trump administration and input from Arab dictators. And now this is being presented as a historic breakthrough. So I'm deeply skeptical of all of this narrative. Of course, I share the prospects of peace and reconciliation between Palestinians and Israelis based on equality and safety and security. But this is not the plan that's going to get us there. Unfortunately, my reading of what's happening is this is a temporary pause in the fighting, which obviously is a good thing. But I suspect in a few months, we're going to be back to where we started from, with a lot of violence and arguing over the exact same sort of questions that have dominated this topic for the last 2 years.
This is an important perspective, of course, to bring into our viewers. And I think many are feeling hopeful, as one would want to feel, but there are so many questions that are left unanswered. And to your point as well, we've been here before. I know you referenced the Camp David summit in 2000. It has been, 2 decades plus since that time. What do you think may be different this time, or could be different? How could things shape in a different way so we do see a different ending?
Well, if one wanted to sort of really struggle to find something positive in this moment. Obviously, what's positive is that there's a ceasefire, that the Israeli hostages are out after incredible suffering, that Palestinian prisoners have been released and reunited with their families. That's largely because the United States, under Trump, has done something that previous American presidents have been very reluctant to do, and that is to draw a red line for Israel and say, look, you can't carry on this way. You have to compromise. So, that I think is a positive development. I think most people realize that, if there was serious moral leadership in the United States that was guided by international law, that was guided by a basic principle that Palestinians and Israelis are equal to the same safety and security guarantees, then, theoretically, we could get to somewhere better. But that's not what's happening right now. This is very much a U.S. and Israeli-centered peace plan that is taking place, let's not forget, against the backdrop of a famine and a certifiable genocide. So this talk, let's say, of rebuilding Gaza If you look at the UN reports, they're saying it would take 15 years just to clear the rubble out of Gaza. Forget any rebuilding. So what's going to happen to the 2 million people there who are starving and now are returning to their homes to find they don't exist? Human life is not sustainable in Gaza because of the pounding of the Israeli army backed by the United States and other Western countries. So this is the reality of the people of Gaza. So, what are they supposed to celebrate? In any sort of meaningful way, it's impossible to sustain human existence in Gaza because what the Israeli army and Netanyahu have done to that small piece of territory over the last 2 years. So I find it very difficult to celebrate sort of the breaking out of peace, given these dire economic and social conditions that have been visited on Gaza over the last 2 years.
Finally, I wanted to ask you, in terms of the next phases of all of this, we certainly know that, to your point, when it comes to the need for aid trucks are starting to roll in. The distribution of aid has been challenging, continues to be challenging. When you look at the images of Gaza now, the infrastructure is gone to the ground. There is so much work to do there. Of course, there is absolutely famine as well. We talked to various aid agencies who talk about how desperate the situation is involving people who are still there right now. So then what is the way forward? We have seen here, as you've pointed out, or you've suggested, that there is a plan that appears to be centered between the U.S. and Israel. We see many leaders from Arab nations and Western nations be brought together here. Is there a conversation going forward that can come into play that could potentially make this turn into a long-term solution?
Yes, but it has to be a conversation that includes both sides in this conflict at the table. And right now there's only one side at the table. So that's obviously a necessary precondition. There has to be a conversation that's rooted around something that, the government of Canada frequently touts as being foundational to Canadian foreign policy, and that is international law. So why is it that international law has to be adhered to, according to the government of Canada, when it comes to Ukraine and Russia? But when it comes to the question of Israel-Palestine, there's no reference to international law, and Canada is not willing to uphold an international law framework. That doesn't contribute, I think, to advancing peace and security in the Middle East. It actually sets the stage for more war and conflict. So those are the things that I think needs to take place. I think there is a resolution of this conflict that actually has been on the world agenda for a very long time. The Palestinians back in 1988 recognized a two-state settlement. No Israeli government has done so. And the United States backs Israel, and Canada and other European countries refuse to join the international consensus and to sort of lead the world community to solve this conflict within an international law framework. And so we're stuck in this cycle. I think that's what has to change. So that's the advice that I would give to anyone who seriously wanted to have a conversation about how we can move this horrific conflict in a better direction.
A lot of insightful thoughts there. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
That was Professor of Middle East and Politics at Georgetown University, Nader Hashemi. Thanks.